Floss Tube friends. Thought I would do a quick video based on a lot of the questions that I've been receiving following my Stitch With Me video. Obviously when I was doing the video, I'm not sure whether I told you, but I was doing tent stitch, which basically is half stitch for those that don't know. But I had a lot of questions about sort of what counts you stitch it on, what's the differences between, you know, the two. So I thought I would try to give you a quick side-by-side view so that you can see for yourself the differences. So predominantly most of mine are full coverage, all barring the one that you're currently looking at, which is my lovely Andromeda. But Andromeda is obviously what you would consider to be your normal cross stitch. So it's your normal full cross. I'm trying to remember for the life of me what count this one is. I'll put it in the description box and probably along the bottom so that you can see. So Andromeda is your basic even weave 2/2 because it's an even weave, and then the skin is done 1/1. So let me get you a bit closer so you can have a better look. So this is 1/1 and this is 2/2 because obviously it's an even weave. So that's your bog standard, normal, everyday cross stitch that you would normally stitch if you're stitching on an even weave. So just as a example, so my alternative reality that I've been stitching on, which is my full coverage, is stitched 1/1 with one strand. And this is a 25 count. So if I put that next to this, let's see if I can do this for you. Okay, so that is the sort of coverage and the sort of size difference between 2/2 on an even weave and 1/1 with one strand. So let me get you a little closer so that you can see. So from a coverage perspective, you can see the difference. This here is 1/1 and this here is 1/1. But against the 2/2, you can see the difference. That is a full cross on a 25 count, 1/1 on a 25 count. That's a full cross. So as a comparison to that, so let me zoom you back out again. Sorry about this, but I'm making everyone feel a bit seasick, yeah? Okay, so if we zoom you back out. So this is your 1/1 on 25 and the type of coverage you'll get. My lovely piece that I still haven't managed to tape to the framers yet because I'm terrible, my lovely Grace Faces is stitched on, I believe this is an 18 count Aida. And this is obviously 2/1 full cross. So both of these are full cross, but you can instantly see the differences between the two sets of stitching and the sizes of what you're stitching. So if I put that side by side, like so. So this one here is on an 18 count Aida. There you go, 18 count Aida. And this one is 2 strands of floss. This is your 1/1 on your 25 count. So quite a big difference between the two. So if I zoom you back out so you can see it, there's your comparison. These are both on full cross. Okay? Now, next comparison. So for those of you that were watching me stitch on my lovely Peacock's Lagoon, now the problem I've got is these are actually on a frame. So let me whiz these off and I'll put the next frame on so you can see. Okay, so we're back. So I've managed to take it off the frame. Let's just move the needle minder. So obviously, like I said, with this one, you can see a small amount of the white when you've got light on it, and bearing in mind this hasn't been washed either. So when you wash it, it tends to fluff up. I like to work on the 25 count because it's much, much easier to see doing it in tent stitch. This is your 25 count, 2 strands. So you can see there's 2 strands there. Let me just show you. 2 strands, like that. So it's 2 strands over 1, okay, on a 25 count even weave. Now, if I show you the comparison, this is exactly the same. It's 2 strands of floss over 1 on a 28 count. So coverage is much, much better. However, the holes and the stitching is much, much smaller. Much, much smaller. So if I try and put it next to something white so you can see, and I zoom you in, there is your comparison. Let me see if I can move you up a little bit. So this is your 25 count, 2 over 1, and that is your 28 count, 2 over 1. Now, there is question over whether by doing it in a tent stitch, whether you lose some of the detail or not. I'm yet to find that out. I think for certain types of designs, that's a possibility because I didn't do very well with my owl. I did an owl. When was it? A couple of years ago that I gave away because I wasn't happy with sort of the detail of it. However, these ones I can see the detail on. Now, as a comparison to that, so bearing in mind that we're doing full comparisons here so that you can see the difference. So both of the ones that you're currently looking at are tent stitch, or also known as half stitch. It's exactly the same. It's basically the first leg of a cross stitch. Now, if I put this here, like so, she says, that, let's zoom you back out again. This one here is alternative reality, which is stitched 1 over 1. So it's basically, instead of using 2 strands and doing a half stitch, I'm using 1 strand and I'm doing both legs of a cross. So let me whiz you back in. So as you can see, there are your comparisons between full cross over 1 with 1 strand on a 25 count, your 25 count 2 over 1 tent stitch, and your 28 count 2 over 1 tent stitch. And I don't think I've got a 28 count with a full cross on it to show you the comparison. But I do have the 18 count Aida, which is there. So there you go. So for those that have asked me the questions about the tent stitch and, you know, should you do tent stitch, should you do full cross? It really all depends on 1, what type of coverage you're looking for, 2, what kind of stitcher you are, what your preference is. But as you can see, they're all very, very different. So depending on whether you like something that looks very, very delicate but is maybe a little more difficult to stitch, because obviously it's a much smaller hole and you're going over 1, you're not going over 2. It's completely different to doing. So if I show you Andromeda, which is obviously your normal 2 strands over 2 squares. The problem is I can't show you side by side. That's what it looks like. So much easier to see, much bigger squares, much bigger stitches against some of these. So for those that have contacted me and asked me the question about the tent stitch, basically, as I just said, tent stitch is half stitch. It's just your first leg of a full cross. And instead of doing a second leg, you move on to the next square. By having the 2 strands is actually what gives you the coverage. But then it will depend on what type of, or what count you're going to use that will basically dictate what your coverage is. So obviously 28 count is much smaller to work with. If you look, I don't know if I can get you close enough to see these holes. Let me see if we can get a difference or a comparison of the holes. So if I move you, sorry. Okay, right, so if I scan you in now. Okay, so this one up here is your 25 count, and as you can see, she says, you can see the holes quite easily. But then when you look at the 28 count, which if I put that on there, you can see the holes are a little bit more tricky to see. That's your 25. That's your 28. So I hope that sort of goes to help. But then against your 18 count Aida, there's your Aida. So this is more for the people that are looking to do some of the full coverage, I think, because a lot of the questions that I've been asked over the last few days have been about the full coverage stitching and why I was doing tent stitch and what I think of tent stitch. I'm loving it. It does go faster. So far I haven't seen any loss of detail, but then I'm not sure whether I could tell at this point in time. But wanted to show everyone sort of the comparison because of the questions that I've been asked and sort of what count should you use. Count basically is preference to the individual. If you've not worked on an even weave before, the difference is when you're stitching a full coverage piece and you're using an even weave, you basically have to imagine that 4 little squares together are the equivalent of your little Aida block on your 18 count. So it's not really that difficult because you've not got to count across 2, you're still going across 1. I don't know if I've got, yeah, see, so if I get my needle and whiz you in again. So, say for instance here, there to there to there is the equivalent of your 1 square block on an Aida. So you would stitch up here and across and then back down and up, or whichever way round you stitch. But the principle is exactly the same. So if we get the Aida, it's exactly the same, because when you're working with your Aida, you would say, for instance, use this hole here and stitch across to here and then down to there and then up to there, which is basically 4 little holes that you're playing with. So if you can imagine that when you're working with an even weave, it's exactly the same. So that's hole 1, that's hole 2, hole 3 and hole 4. So it'll go up and across and then whichever way round you do your legs, and then down and up and across again. That's the way I do my legs. But for those that have asked me the questions about how difficult is it to work with an even weave on a full coverage, it's really no different to working on a bit of Aida, because you're basically only playing with 4 squares because you're not stitching across 2. It's not like you've got to start thinking, right, okay, it's not the next hole, it's the next one. The principle is exactly the same on full coverage when you're working on these types of counts, on your 25 count and your 28 count. But like I said, if you're new to it, the 25 count is much, much easier to see. However, you get a much finer stitch, or a much more delicate stitch on a 10 stitch on a 28 2/1. But then this is the bit that sort of throws you, is that when you then look at your full cross, which is on a 25 count, which is exactly the same as this one, when you look at that, and I've stitched this one with one thread, just one strand of cotton over one, but in a full cross, there's your comparison between the two. I wouldn't like to say which one is bigger. I mean, obviously this one is it looks much smaller, but you get really good coverage. But then you get really good coverage, I think, on a 25 count 1/1, but it takes longer because you're doing both legs of the stitch. But on the 28 count, I don't think the coverage is any worse. I don't see anything that's different. There's your coverage on your 28 on a 10th stitch. So yeah, whereas obviously on the 25, yes, you can see a small amount of the white, but then that is a very dark against a very white, and I've got a very bright light over the top of me to show you this. So I hope that helps some people that have asked the questions of the differences. And you know, yes, 10th stitch is faster, but it depends on what look you're going for. It depends on whether you like to do 10th stitch. I think on the big full coverage pieces, sometimes if you know you've got to do a full cross in it, it's going to take a lot longer, or twice the time really, because it's a full cross. I just wanted to show you the comparison between the differences. And then obviously for those that have never worked on an even weave, that have only ever worked on an Aida, what the difference is in size of stitching and overall size comparison between the even weaves. So there you go. I hope that sort of helps. I really do. There were so many questions about how I did it that I thought I would address it and make it a little easier for everyone. I also got asked some questions about how I do my parking. And I know that obviously I did a how I use my GoodNotes app, and you saw me parking, but I was asked specifically to explain my staggers. So when I start, obviously I start in my top left-hand corner and I do my first square. Then I would move across to the second square, so it would look like I've got 2 squares across. But then instead of going across again, I'll go down one, which will then give me a stagger. And that's how I start it. And then I basically just keep coming down and keep staggering down. So for every one that I do across, I'll come down. Then I'll come down and across, and then I'll come down and across until I get to the end again. And then I'll go back to the top and I'll do the same thing again. And then when I get to a page finish, I'll actually do a full page finish. I tend to find that I don't get lines. I know that some people do get lines if they put a full page end on it. I've never ran into that problem. Maybe because I stagger, maybe it's because of the consistency of how I stitch. I know that some people's tension can be a lot, you know, they've got an uneven tension, or they pull their fabric quite a lot. They have like a tight tension. And I think sometimes when you've got a tight tension, it can give you lines. But I tend to find that this works for me, and then I'll put a straight edge against a page finish, as you can see on my alternative reality. This was done exactly the same, stitched exactly the same as the other ones with staggers, but then I'll complete my page with a full, oh, we don't want to go there, we want to come back out, with a full page finish with a full line. But then say for instance, I mean, I am actually going to start back up here. and work across. But say for instance I was going to start down here, I would do my first square, come across, do my second square, then come down and do my third square. And then from that point onwards, I've got like a step. It steps. And then I go up to the top and I just step, 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 step. And I keep doing that until I get all the way over here and then there's no steps to go. And then I'll put a page end on there. So yeah, so it was basically just to give, for those that asked the question, a little insight of the differences of the stitching side by side, so that they could see the comparison of the tent stitch against the full cross, and then obviously the comparison of the 28 count next to the 25 count, and then put that next to a 25 count 1/1 full cross, so that you could see the comparison. So I hope that helps answer some people's questions and curiosity about it all. Obviously, if you've got any further questions, do not hesitate to leave me a comment in the message box. I do try and read them all. I don't necessarily get to answer them all these days. But if I don't answer it in a comment to you, then I will try and address it in another video so that I've answered any questions that have come up. So there you go. I'm sorry if you can hear my washing machine in the background. It's Friday. It's washing evening, so I do all my washing on a Friday night. So that's it for me. Hopefully I'll be getting another video up shortly for you. But like I said, yeah, I hope that in some way that helps people. For those that are, you know, undecided of whether they want to stitch a full coverage, and if so, what they want to stitch it on, how they want to stitch it, do they want it to take a long time? Do they prefer tent stitch? Have they ever thought of tent stitch? What's the differences? There you go. It's all right there, right in front of you. So, yeah. I personally am finding that I'm leaning more towards my tent stitch purely for speed. I love full coverage. There's so many designs that I want to stitch. To stitch them all in a full cross, I think I haven't got a big enough lifetime to work my way through it all, or time, because I'm still working, because I'm not a kept woman, unfortunately. So I hope that helps everyone, and I will see you all again very, very soon. So until next time, bye bye for now.